The wanted advertisement in the Denver newspaper had seemed like Providence, appearing just as Delilah Harper's last teaching position dissolved beneath her feet like sand in a riverbed. Independence. Missouri needed a governess for a rancher's daughter, and Delilah needed a fresh start far from the whispers that followed her through the streets of her hometown. It was 1876, and respectable women who broke engagements were not treated kindly, even when the man in question had proven himself a drunkard and a liar. The stagecoach bounced along the rutted trail, and Delilah pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching the landscape shift from rolling hills to flatter terrain dotted with homesteads. Her carpetbag sat beside her, containing everything she owned that mattered: her teaching certificates, 3 practical dresses, 1 Sunday best gown, her mother's pearl earrings, and a leather-bound copy of Shakespeare's complete works. At 24 years old, she was beginning again with less than she had started with at 18. Independence sprawled before her as the coach rattled into town. The settlement bustled with activity, wagons crowding the main street, merchants calling out their wares, and the scent of livestock mixing with dust in the afternoon heat. The driver helped her down, depositing her bag on the wooden walkway outside the general store where the rancher was supposed to meet her. She waited, smoothing her traveling dress and adjusting her bonnet against the sun. Minutes stretched into half an hour. The heat pressed against her skin, and she was beginning to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake when a tall figure on horseback appeared at the end of the street. The man rode toward her with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his entire life in the saddle. Even from a distance, Delilah could see the breadth of his shoulders beneath his dusty shirt, the shadow of a beard darkening his jaw. He dismounted in one fluid motion, looping his horse's reins around the hitching post before turning to face her. Austin Palmer stood well over 6 feet, his dark hair curling slightly beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His eyes were the color of whiskey in sunlight, framed by lines that spoke of squinting across open plains and weathering harsh seasons. He looked to be in his early 30s, though weariness seemed to add years to his expression. He removed his hat, revealing more of a face that might have been handsome if not for the grief etched into every feature. "Miss Harper." His voice was deep, rough around the edges like creek stones worn smooth in places and sharp in others. "Mr. Palmer, I was beginning to think you had forgotten. Ranch work does not follow a clock, madam. I came as soon as I could." He picked up her carpetbag without asking. "My wagon is around the corner. The ranch is about an hour's ride from town." She followed him, struggling to match his long strides. The wagon was serviceable but weathered, pulled by 2 sturdy horses that stamped impatiently. Austin offered his hand to help her up, and even through her glove, she felt the calluses that spoke of hard labor. They rode in silence for the first several minutes, the wagon creaking beneath them as Independence faded behind rolling hills. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, vast and intimidating and beautiful in a way that made Delilah's chest tighten. She had grown up in Denver, where buildings provided definition and boundaries. Out here, the sky seemed to swallow everything. "How old is your daughter?" she finally asked, breaking the silence that had grown uncomfortable. "Emma just turned 7 last month." His hands tightened on the reins, knuckles whitening. "Her mother died 2 years ago. Fever took her in 3 days. Emma has not spoken a word since." Delilah turned to stare at him, shock rippling through her. "Not spoken at all. In 2 years. Doctor says there is nothing wrong with her voice. It is grief, he thinks, or stubbornness, or both." Austin's jaw clenched. "I have tried everything. Kindness, discipline, bribes, threats. Nothing works." She just looks at me with those eyes so much like her mother's that I can barely stand it." The raw honesty in his voice surprised her. Men of this time and place rarely admitted to such vulnerabilities, especially to strange women they had just hired. Delilah felt something shift in her chest, sympathy mingling with professional interest. "What did your advertisement mean by teaching her to be civilized?" That seemed an odd phrase. Austin was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Emma runs wild. She refuses to wear dresses, climbs trees like a mountain cat, sleeps in the barn more often than her own bed. She has forgotten how to be a little girl. I need someone to remind her. Or perhaps, Delilah said carefully, she is finding her own way to survive her grief. Children do not process loss the way adults do. His head turned sharply toward her. "You think I am handling this wrong. I think you hired me to teach her, which suggests you recognize something needs to change. I am merely suggesting we consider what Emma needs, not what society expects." Austin's expression darkened, and for a moment, Delilah thought she had gone too far. But then his shoulders dropped slightly, and he returned his attention to the road. "My wife would have liked you. She always said I was too rigid in my thinking." They continued in silence, but it felt different now, less strained. The ranch appeared gradually, first as a distant smudge against the landscape, then resolving into a collection of buildings. A two-story house with a wide porch, a large barn, several outbuildings, and corrals containing horses and cattle. It was more substantial than Delilah had expected, speaking to prosperity and careful management. A girl sat on the porch railing, her legs dangling, wearing trousers and a shirt that looked like they had been cut down from adult sizes. Her dark hair hung in tangled waves past her shoulders, and even from a distance, Delilah could see the wariness in her posture. Austin brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "Emma," he called, his voice gentler than Delilah had yet heard it. "Come meet Miss Harper. She is going to be your teacher." The girl did not move, did not acknowledge them at all. She simply stared, her small face expressionless, her hands gripping the railing on either side of her thin frame. Delilah climbed down from the wagon before Austin could assist her, approaching slowly, keeping her movements calm and unthreatening. "Hello, Emma. I am Miss Harper, but you may call me Miss Delilah if you prefer. Your father has told me you are quite skilled at climbing. That takes considerable courage and strength." Still no response, but something flickered in those dark eyes. Interest, perhaps, or suspicion. "I am not very good at climbing," Delilah continued, settling herself on the porch steps, deliberately positioning herself lower than Emma. "I tried once when I was about your age and fell right into a rosebush. I had thorns in unmentionable places for a week." Was that the ghost of a smile? Delilah could not be sure, but Emma's grip on the railing had loosened slightly. Austin stood behind her, his shadow falling across the dusty ground. "Emma, show Miss Harper to the spare room. She will be staying with us." For a moment, Delilah thought the girl would refuse. But Emma slipped down from the railing with surprising grace and disappeared into the house without a backward glance. Delilah followed, aware of Austin behind her with her carpetbag. The house interior was clean but sparse, decorated with the bare minimum of comfort. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, surrounded by simple furniture that looked handmade. Stairs led to the second floor, and Emma was already halfway up them. The spare room was small but adequate, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a wardrobe, and a single window overlooking the barn. Emma stood in the doorway, watching as Austin set down the carpetbag. "Thank you, Emma," Delilah said warmly. "This is perfect." Austin cleared his throat. "Supper is at 6. I do not expect fancy cooking, but I do expect you to help manage the household. My foreman's wife, Rosa, comes 3 times a week to help with the heavy work, but day-to-day cooking and cleaning falls to us. That seems reasonable. Good. He turned to leave, pausing in the doorway. Emma, leave Miss Harper to get settled. You have chores. The girl vanished like smoke, her footsteps light on the stairs. Austin lingered, his hand on the door frame. I should warn you, the previous governesses did not last long. The longest stayed 3 weeks. How many have there been? You are the 5th. Delilah straightened her spine. I am not so easily discouraged, Mr. Palmer. Something that might have been respect crossed his features. We will see. After he left, Delilah unpacked her meager belongings, hanging her dresses in the wardrobe and placing her mother's earrings on the washstand where they caught the afternoon light. Through the window, she could see Emma in the corral, perched on a fence rail, watching a chestnut mare circle the enclosure. The girl's posture spoke of a loneliness so profound it made Delilah's throat tighten. She had 3 hours until supper. Time enough to explore and begin understanding the dynamics of this grieving household. The kitchen was larger than expected, with a cast iron stove, a sturdy table, and shelves lined with basic provisions. Someone, probably Rosa, kept it organized and functional. Delilah found flour, salt pork, dried beans, and a few precious eggs. She could work with this. She was examining the contents of the pantry when Austin appeared in the doorway, startling her. Checking supplies, he asked, getting familiar with what is available. I thought I would make supper tonight, give you a sense of my cooking. You do not need to prove yourself immediately. I prefer to be useful. She closed the pantry door, studying him in the better light of the kitchen. Up close, she could see the amber flecks in his brown eyes, the silver beginning to thread through his dark hair at his temples. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 32 or 33, but hardship had aged him. Tell me about your wife. The question clearly surprised him. Why? Because Emma loved her and you loved her, and her absence shapes everything in this house. If I am to help Emma, I need to understand what she lost. Austin moved to the window, his back to her, tension visible in every line of his body. Catherine was from Philadelphia, educated, refined, everything I was not. Her father owned the bank in Independence, and everyone said she was too good for a cowboy like me. His voice roughened. Maybe they were right. Did she think so? No. Catherine saw something in me I am not sure was ever really there. She wanted to live on a ranch, said she was tired of city society and its restrictions. We built this place together, from nothing. He pressed his palm against the window frame. She made curtains for every window, planted flowers that kept dying in the heat, taught herself to cook on that stove even though she had never cooked a day in her life before coming here. She was terrible at it initially. Despite the grief in his words, Delilah heard the love, strong and enduring even 2 years after death had severed them. She sounds remarkable. She was. He turned back to face her, and the pain in his eyes was so raw that Delilah had to resist the urge to reach out to him. And then she was gone, and I had this ranch to run and a daughter who looked at me like I was a stranger. I did not know how to be both parents. Hell, I barely knew how to be one. You are doing better than you think, Delilah said gently. Emma is fed, clothed, and safe. Those are not small things. But she does not speak. She barely looks at me, and when she does, all I see is Catherine, and it hurts so badly I can hardly breathe. The confession hung between them, heavy with 2 years of accumulated grief and guilt. Delilah understood suddenly that she had not been hired just to teach Emma. Austin was drowning, and he needed someone to throw him a rope. Mr. Palmer, she began, but he held up a hand. Austin, if we are going to be living under the same roof, formality seems excessive. Austin, then. And you should call me Delilah. She moved closer, lowering her voice. Grief is not something you overcome. It is something you learn to carry. You and Emma are both trying to carry it alone, and that isolation is making it heavier than it needs to be. You sound like you speak from experience. My mother died when I was 16. For a long time, my father and I moved around each other like ghosts, neither wanting to acknowledge our pain because we thought it would make the others worse. It nearly destroyed us both. She met his gaze steadily. What saved us was finally talking about her. Remembering her together, letting our grief become a shared thing instead of a wall between us. Austin was quiet, absorbing her words. Finally, he nodded. I will try, but I cannot promise it will work. That is all anyone can do. He left her then, and Delilah set about preparing supper. She found some root vegetables that still looked fresh, salt pork that she could render for fat, and dried herbs hanging near the stove. It would not be fancy, but it would be nourishing and warm. Emma appeared as if summoned by the smells of cooking, hovering in the kitchen doorway with that same wary expression. Delilah did not acknowledge her directly, simply continuing to work while humming an old song her mother used to sing. Would you like to help? She asked casually, not looking up from chopping carrots. I could use someone to set the table. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then small footsteps crossed the wooden floor and Emma moved to the cabinet where plates were stored. She set 3 places with careful precision, adding forks and knives, even folding cloth napkins beside each plate. Thank you, Delilah said warmly. That looks perfect. Emma did not smile, but her shoulders relaxed fractionally. It was progress, however small. Austin joined them at 6 exactly, his hair damp as if he had washed up at the pump outside. He looked surprised to see the table set, and food already served, steam rising from bowls of vegetable stew and thick slices of bread. They ate in silence initially, but it was a different quality of silence than the oppressive quiet Delilah had sensed earlier. Austin complimented the food, and Emma cleaned her bowl with more enthusiasm than Delilah suspected she showed for most meals. Tomorrow, Delilah said, addressing Emma directly, I thought we could start with reading. Do you have a favorite book? Emma's eyes flicked to her father, then back to her empty bowl. She did not respond, but her hand moved slightly as if she wanted to point somewhere. She used to like fairy tales, Austin offered quietly. Catherine would read to her every night. Fairy tales are excellent for teaching. They have grammar and vocabulary and moral lessons. Delilah smiled at Emma. We could read together in the mornings before it gets too hot. And in the afternoons, perhaps you could teach me about ranch life. I know absolutely nothing about horses or cattle. This time, Emma did look up, and there was definite interest in her expression. A child who had been treated as broken, in need of fixing, was being offered the chance to be the expert, the teacher. It was a reversal that clearly appealed to her. After supper, Austin retreated to his study to work on accounts, leaving Delilah to clean up with Emma's help. The girl moved efficiently, clearly accustomed to the routine, drying dishes as Delilah washed them in water heated on the stove. You are very helpful, Delilah observed. I can tell you have been taking good care of your father. Emma's hand stilled for just a moment before resuming their work. In that pause, Delilah glimpsed the burden this small girl had been carrying, trying to fill a void far too large for her narrow shoulders. It is all right to still be a child, you know, Delilah said softly. Adults are supposed to take care of children, not the other way around. Those dark eyes met hers, swimming with something that might have been tears, but Emma blinked them away fiercely. She finished drying the last dish, put it away with the others, and then fled upstairs without a backward glance. Delilah let her go, finishing the kitchen cleanup alone. She was drying her hands when Austin emerged from his study, drawn by the sounds of movement. "Where is Emma?" She went upstairs. "I think I pushed a bit too hard." He leaned against the door frame, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. Pushing is what she needs. She has been stagnant for too long. Grief is not stagnation. It is a process. It has been 2 years. And how long did it take you to stop expecting to see Catherine when you walked into a room? The words came out sharper than Delilah intended, but Austin did not flinch. Instead, something like recognition crossed his face. "I still do," he admitted. "Every single day I still turn to tell her something and find empty space." "Then why would you expect less from your daughter?" The question hung between them, unanswerable and undeniable. Austin pushed off from the door frame, moving closer, and Delilah became acutely aware of his height, his proximity, the way he smelled of leather and soap and something indefinably masculine. "You are not like the other governesses," he said, his voice low. "I should hope not, given that they all left." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "They were afraid of Emma, thought she was touched in the head or cursed. They treated her like something fragile and dangerous at the same time. She is neither. She is a little girl who lost her mother and is doing her best to survive it." "And what are you, Miss Delilah Harper?" The question felt loaded with more than its simple words. Delilah met his gaze, refusing to look away. "I am someone who understands loss and is trying to help others understand it too." Austin nodded slowly, and something shifted between them, some invisible barrier cracking just enough to let understanding seep through. "Thank you for supper. It was the best meal this house has seen since Catherine died." He left before she could respond, climbing the stairs with heavy footsteps. Delilah stood alone in the kitchen, her heart beating faster than it should, wondering what exactly she had gotten herself into. The first week passed in a blur of establishing routines and testing boundaries. Emma remained silent, but began to engage more, joining Delilah for morning reading sessions, where they worked through a collection of fairy tales and simple novels. The girl could read well, far better than many 7-year-olds Delilah had taught, which spoke to Catherine's dedication before her death. In the afternoons, true to her promise, Emma led Delilah around the ranch, showing her the horses, the cattle in the distant pastures, the chickens that roosted in the barn, and the vegetable garden that had gone mostly wild but still produced the occasional tomato or squash. Emma communicated through gestures and expressions, and Delilah found herself learning to read the girl's body language as fluently as words. Austin watched these interactions from a distance, and Delilah often felt his eyes on her as she moved through her days. He was present but remote, rising before dawn to work the ranch and returning at dusk covered in dust and sweat. They shared meals and occasional conversation, but he kept a careful distance, as if afraid of something Delilah could not quite identify. Rosa arrived on Wednesday, a warm, maternal woman in her 40s who had worked for the Palmer family since Catherine was alive. She embraced Delilah like a long-lost daughter, clearly relieved that someone was finally helping with Emma. "That little girl, she has been so sad," Rosa said in her accented English, shaking her head as she kneaded bread dough with vigorous efficiency. "And Mr. Austin, he tries, but he does not know how. Men, they think they can fix everything with work and sweat. Hearts do not mend that way." "How was Catherine?" Delilah asked, helping to prepare vegetables for preserving. Rosa's face softened. "Oh, she was sunshine, that one, always laughing, always finding joy even when things were hard. The first years on this ranch they struggled, but she never complained. She would sing while she worked, terrible singing, could not carry a tune to save her life, but it made everyone smile." Her eyes grew distant with memory. When she got sick, it happened so fast. One day she was fine and the next she was burning with fever. Mr. Austin, he rode all the way to Independence for the doctor, nearly killed his horse getting there and back. But it was already too late. What happened to Emma? She was here when her mama died. Catherine kept asking for her, even when she was out of her head with fever. Emma sat beside that bed for 3 days, holding her mama's hand. On the 3rd day, Catherine opened her eyes, smiled at her little girl, said, "I love you, my darling," and then she was gone. Rosa wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron. Emma has not spoken since that moment. The last words she heard were her mama's, and I think maybe she is afraid that if she speaks, she will use up all the words and have none left to remember. The image was heartbreaking, and Delilah felt tears prick her own eyes. That poor child. Both of them are poor. Mr. Austin, he loved that woman like breathing. After she died, it was like watching a man drown on dry land. Rosa fixed Delilah with a pointed look. "But you are different from the others who came. You have strength in you and kindness. Maybe you are what they need." Delilah ducked her head, uncomfortable with the weight of Rosa's expectations. "I am just trying to help Emma with her education." "Hum." Rosa's tone suggested she believed nothing of the sort, but she let the subject drop, turning instead to gossip about Independence and the various families who lived in the area. That evening, Delilah found Emma in the barn, sitting in the hayloft with a small tabby cat curled in her lap. The girl's face showed an expression of such pure contentment that Delilah hesitated to interrupt. But Emma had seen her and was gesturing for her to climb up. The ladder was steeper than it looked, and Delilah managed it with less grace than she would have liked, arriving at the top slightly breathless and covered in hay dust. Emma's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. "Mock me all you like," Delilah said, settling herself beside the girl. "I told you I was not good at climbing." The cat, a bold creature with white paws and a crooked tail, immediately transferred its affections to Delilah, purring like a tiny engine as it kneaded her skirt with its claws. Emma watched, and this time there was definitely a smile ghosting across her lips. They sat together in companionable silence, watching dust motes dance in the slanting light that filtered through the barn's gaps. Below, horses shifted in their stalls, and somewhere in the distance cattle lowed. It was peaceful in a way that Delilah had never experienced in the city, a quiet that felt full rather than empty. "Your mother used to come here, did she not?" Delilah asked softly. Emma nodded, her hand stroking the cat's fur in long, rhythmic movements. What was her favorite thing about it? For a moment, Delilah thought Emma would not respond. Then the girl reached out and pointed toward the barn's large opening that framed a view of the prairie stretching toward the horizon, painted gold and amber by the setting sun. "The view," Delilah said. "Yes, I can understand that." "It is beautiful." Emma's hand moved again, this time pressing against her own chest over her heart. Then she pointed to the view once more. "The view made her heart happy," Delilah translated, and Emma nodded vigorously, her eyes bright. "I am glad you shared it with me. Thank you." They remained in the loft until Austin's voice called them for supper, and Delilah saw something ease in Emma's expression, as if sharing this sacred space had created a bond between them that went deeper than words. Over supper, Austin was quieter than usual, picking at his food and responding to Delilah's attempts at conversation with monosyllables. She was about to give up when he suddenly spoke. "I need to go into Independence tomorrow to pick up supplies. I thought you might want to come, perhaps get some books or materials for Emma's lessons." "That would be wonderful," Delilah said, surprised by the offer. "Emma too, of course." His eyes flicked to his daughter. "You have been working hard. You deserve a treat." Emma's head shot up, eyes wide with surprise and something that looked like hope. Austin's expression softened, and for a moment, Delilah saw the man he must have been before grief carved away his capacity for lightness. "We will leave after breakfast. Bring a bonnet. It will be hot." That night, Delilah lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling around her. Coyotes sang in the distance, and the wind whispered through the eaves. She thought about Austin's careful distance, Emma's locked-away voice, and the ghost of Catherine that haunted every corner of this house. She had come here expecting to teach a child her letters and numbers, to instill proper manners and social graces. Instead, she found herself trying to mend something far more fragile and infinitely more important. Two hearts had broken in this house, and they were learning to beat again in painful, halting rhythms. And somewhere in the process of helping them heal, Delilah was beginning to realize that her own heart, which she had thought safely armored after her broken engagement, was not as protected as she had believed. Austin Palmer was not an easy man. He was gruff and distant and carried his grief like a physical weight that bowed his shoulders. But beneath that, she glimpsed flashes of who he had been, who he might be again. A man capable of deep love, fierce loyalty, and unexpected tenderness. It was dangerous to notice these things. She was here as an employee, nothing more. Getting emotionally entangled with her employer would be foolish and unprofessional. But as she finally drifted towards sleep, Delilah could not quite convince herself that noticing was something she could stop, any more than she could stop the sun from rising or the prairie wind from blowing. The trip to Independence the next day started with a flurry of preparation. Emma appeared at breakfast wearing a dress, the first time Delilah had seen her in anything other than trousers. It was slightly too small, evidence of how much the girl had grown in the 2 years since her mother's death. But Emma wore it with obvious discomfort, tugging at the collar and sleeves. "You look lovely," Delilah said, and Emma's scowl suggested she disagreed vehemently. Austin emerged from his room wearing what were clearly his town clothes. Trousers without patches, a clean shirt, and a vest that made his shoulders look even broader. He had shaved, too, revealing the strong line of his jaw and making him look younger, less careworn. When his eyes met Delilah's, she felt an unexpected flutter in her chest that she firmly suppressed. The wagon ride to Independence took just over an hour, and this time, the silence felt comfortable rather than strained. Emma sat between them, and Delilah noticed the way Austin's hand occasionally moved as if to touch his daughter's shoulder before pulling back, as though he had forgotten how to offer casual affection. Independence bustled with mid-morning activity when they arrived. Austin helped both Emma and Delilah down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady, and Delilah found herself acutely aware of the brief contact. "I need to see the feed supplier and the blacksmith," Austin said. "The mercantile is down the street. They have books and school supplies. Get whatever you need. I have an account there." He handed Delilah a small leather purse with coins, for extras if Emma wants something. Before Delilah could protest the generosity, he was striding away, his long legs eating up the dusty street. Emma took Delilah's hand, the first time she had done so, and tugged her toward the mercantile. The store was a treasure trove of goods, from practical items like flour and nails to luxuries like ribbons and hard candies. Emma's eyes went wide at the sight of a display of peppermint sticks in a glass jar, and Delilah smiled. "Should we get some? We could share them on the ride home." Emma nodded enthusiastically, her fingers tightening around Delilah's hand. Mr. Thompson, who ran the mercantile, was a rotund man with mutton chops and a friendly demeanor. "Miss Emma, as I live and breathe, I have not seen you in town in months, and you must be the new teacher everyone is talking about." "Everyone?" Delilah asked, amused. "Small town, madam. News travels fast. Heard you have been at the Palmer Ranch for over a week, which is longer than any of the others lasted." He winked at Emma. "This one is a handful, are you not, little miss?" Emma's expression closed down immediately, and Delilah felt anger spike through her. "Emma is a delightful student and a very intelligent young lady," she said firmly. "Now, we need several books suitable for a 7-year-old reader, some writing slates and chalk and those peppermint sticks." Mr. Thompson had the grace to look abashed. "Of course, madam. I have some new primers that just came in, and a lovely edition of Aesop's Fables." They spent a pleasant half-hour selecting materials, with Emma pointing out books that interested her and Delilah making mental notes about the girls' preferences. Emma was drawn to adventure stories and tales about animals, which made sense for a child growing up on a ranch. As they were finalizing their purchases, a woman's voice cut through the store's ambient noise. "Well, I see Austin has found himself another governess. I wonder how long this one will last." Delilah turned to find a woman in her late 20s, dressed in an elaborate gown that seemed excessive for a morning in Independence. She had blonde hair arranged in perfect curls, and a face that might have been pretty if not for the spite twisting her features. "I am Delilah Harper," she said evenly. "And you are Marion Foster. My father owns the bank, and I have known Austin Palmer since we were children." Her eyes raked over Delilah with obvious dismissal. "You are not from around here. I came from Denver. How cosmopolitan." The word dripped with sarcasm. "Of course, Austin's late wife was from Philadelphia, so he seems to have a preference for city women. Though I cannot imagine why anyone would choose that isolated ranch when they could have a comfortable life in town." Emma had pressed herself against Delilah's side, her small body rigid with tension. Delilah put a protective arm around her shoulders. "The ranch is lovely, and Emma is a wonderful student. I consider myself quite fortunate." Marion's laugh was sharp. "Give it time, Miss Harper. That silent child and her grief-stricken father have a way of driving off even the most determined helpers. I give you another week at most." "Then I suppose we will have to prove you wrong." Delilah kept her voice pleasant, refusing to show how much the woman's words stung. "Good day, Miss Foster." She collected their purchases and ushered Emma out of the store, feeling Marion's eyes boring into her back. On the wooden walkway outside, Emma looked up at her with an expression that was pure gratitude mixed with something darker, an old hurt that Marion's words had obviously reopened. "Some people," Delilah said quietly, "carry so much unhappiness inside themselves that they cannot help but spread it to others. We do not have to accept their poison." Emma's hand squeezed hers and Delilah squeezed back, a silent pact between them. They found Austin at the blacksmith's, watching as the smithy examined one of the wagon wheels. He looked up as they approached, his eyes immediately cataloging Emma's distress. "What happened?" "We encountered Miss Foster at the mercantile," Delilah said. "She was unpleasant." Austin's jaw clenched and something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "What did she say?" "Nothing worth repeating. We handled it." He studied her for a long moment, and Delilah had the sense of being evaluated, measured against some internal standard. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him because he nodded. "Marion has always been bitter. She expected me to marry her instead of Catherine. The fact that I chose a stranger over the bank owner's daughter has never sat well with her pride. She seems to carry a great deal of resentment. Some people feed on that." He turned back to the blacksmith. "How long for the repair? Hour, maybe 2. Austin sighed, then looked at Emma and Delilah. There is a cafe down the street that makes decent pie. We might as well wait in comfort." The cafe was small but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh coffee. They settled into a corner table and a middle-aged waitress appeared almost immediately, her face lighting up when she saw Emma. "Little Emma Palmer, look how you have grown," she turned to Austin. "It is good to see you bringing her to town, Mr. Palmer, and this must be the new teacher. Miss Delilah Harper, this is Mabel. She makes the best apple pie in Missouri." "Well, I do not know about that," Mabel said, clearly pleased. "But I will bring you all a slice and some milk for the young lady. Coffee for you too." After she bustled away, Austin removed his hat and ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Delilah was learning meant he was uncomfortable or uncertain. "I am sorry about Marian," he said abruptly. "She has no right to harass you. I can handle Miss Foster. I am more concerned about how her words affected Emma." Austin's eyes moved to his daughter, who was tracing patterns in a small pile of sugar she had spilled on the table. "Emma knows Marian is not a friend. Catherine could not stand her. May I ask an impertinent question? Seems to be your specialty." Despite the words, there was no heat in his tone, and Delilah thought she detected the faintest hint of amusement. "Did you ever consider Marian's suit?" "No. She is everything I do not want in a woman, shallow, cruel, and obsessed with social standing. Catherine was the opposite in every way. She saw people, truly saw them, and she loved without reservation." His expression softened, the grief less sharp than it had been. "Emma has her mother's heart. She feels things deeply, which is why losing Catherine hit her so hard." Mabel returned with pie and drinks, interrupting the conversation. The pie was indeed excellent, and Emma attacked hers with enthusiasm that made both adults smile. They were finishing their meal when a commotion outside drew their attention. Through the cafe window, Delilah could see a crowd gathering in the street, and someone was shouting. Austin stood immediately, his hand instinctively going to the gun belt he wore when in town. "Stay here," he ordered, then was out the door before Delilah could respond. She and Emma moved to the window, watching as Austin pushed through the crowd. Two men were fighting in the street, fists flying, while others cheered or called for them to stop. Austin waded into the fray without hesitation, grabbing one combatant by the collar and physically hauling him back. "That is enough." His voice carried easily over the noise. "Take it somewhere else or cool off in the sheriff's cell." One of the fighters, a young man with blood streaming from his nose, swung at Austin. It was a mistake. Austin blocked the blow easily and landed a solid punch to the man's midsection that doubled him over. "I said enough." The second fighter, older and more controlled, stepped back with his hands raised. "No quarrel with you, Palmer. This is between me and him. Not anymore. You can settle it legal or not at all." The crowd was dispersing, the excitement over. Austin hauled the younger man to his feet and marched him toward what Delilah assumed was the sheriff's office. The older fighter shook his head and walked away in the opposite direction. Emma had watched the entire exchange with wide eyes, and when Austin returned to the cafe a few minutes later, brushing dust from his clothes, she looked at him with something Delilah had not seen before: admiration. "Everything is settled," he said, reclaiming his seat. "Just some hotheads with more pride than sense." "You are very good at diffusing situations," Delilah observed. "Learned young. When you are as big as I am, people either avoid you or want to test themselves against you. I got tired of fighting early." They waited another hour for the wheel repair to be completed, spending the time browsing through the books Delilah had purchased. Emma pointed out illustrations she liked, and Austin listened with an attention that seemed to surprise even him, as if he were rediscovering his daughter through Delilah's eyes. The ride home was quiet but pleasant, with Emma dozing against Delilah's shoulder, exhausted by the excitement of the day. Austin drove with one hand, his expression distant. "Thank you," he said suddenly, his voice low enough not to wake Emma. "For what?" "For standing up to Marion. For seeing past Emma's silence. For being here." He glanced at her, and in the afternoon light his eyes were warm. "I know this is not what you expected when you took this position." "Life rarely is," Delilah said softly, "but sometimes the unexpected turns out to be exactly what we need." His hand twitched on the reins, as if he wanted to reach for hers, but could not quite bring himself to cross that boundary. Instead, he returned his attention to the road, but Delilah thought she saw the hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. As the ranch appeared on the horizon, Delilah felt an unexpected sense of homecoming, as if in the space of less than 2 weeks this place had claimed a piece of her heart. She was supposed to be just passing through, a teacher hired to do a job. But looking at the man beside her and the child sleeping against her shoulder, Delilah realized she was in danger of becoming far more entangled than was wise. And the most terrifying part was that she was not sure she wanted to resist. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Emma continued her silent communication, but she grew more animated, more willing to engage. She led Delilah on longer excursions around the ranch, showing her secret places. A creek where frogs sang at twilight, a meadow where wildflowers grew in riotous profusion, an old oak tree with branches perfect for climbing. Delilah's initial hesitation about climbing had given way to determination not to disappoint Emma, and she found herself scrambling up trees and rocks with increasing confidence. Her dresses suffered for it, hems tearing and fabric snagging, until Rosa took pity on her and helped her sew a split skirt that allowed for more movement while maintaining propriety. Austin watched these developments with an expression Delilah could not quite read. He maintained his careful distance during the day, but in the evenings, after Emma had gone to bed, he began joining Delilah on the porch, where they would sit in the cooling darkness and talk. These conversations ranged from practical matters like Emma's progress to deeper topics, their childhoods, their dreams, the paths that had led them to this moment. Austin spoke more freely in the dark, as if the absence of light made vulnerability easier. He told her about building the ranch from nothing, working himself to exhaustion to prove he could provide for Catherine. He described the first years of their marriage, the happiness mixed with hardship, the way they had learned to lean on each other when times were tough. Delilah shared her own history. Growing up as the daughter of a shopkeeper in Denver, her mother's death from pneumonia, her father's subsequent withdrawal into himself. She told him about her broken engagement, the relief mixed with shame when she had walked away from a man who loved whiskey more than he loved her. "You were brave to leave," Austin said one night, his voice drifting through the darkness. "Many women would have stayed out of fear or social pressure. I watched my mother diminish herself for my father's sake, making herself smaller so he could feel bigger. After she died, I promised myself I would never do that." Delilah drew her shawl tighter against the evening chill. "When I realized my fiancé expected exactly that diminishment, I knew I could not stay." His loss. The simple statement warmed her more than it should have. "I thought I would teach for a few years, and then perhaps find someone who wanted a partner rather than a decoration. But the longer I remain unmarried, the more difficult that becomes. I am 24, which society considers dangerously close to spinsterhood. Society is full of fools." Austin shifted in his chair, and Delilah heard the creak of wood. "Catherine was 26 when we married." Her parents were horrified she had waited so long, but she said she was waiting for the right person, not just any person. She sounds like she was very wise. She was. A long pause. You remind me of her sometimes. Delilah's breath caught. How so? The way you look at Emma, like you see the person she is rather than the problem everyone else sees. The way you stand up to people like Marion without backing down. Catherine had that same strength wrapped in kindness. His chair creaked again, and Delilah sensed him turning toward her. I am glad you are here, Delilah. The use of her first name without the misfelt intimate, a crossing of the invisible line they had been carefully maintaining. Delilah's heart beat faster, and she was grateful for the darkness that hid the flush she felt spreading across her cheeks. I am glad to be here, she said, and meant it more than she had expected. After that night, something shifted between them. Austin began finding excuses to be near her during the day, asking her opinion on ranch matters, inviting her to ride out with him to check on the cattle, teaching her how to handle a horse properly. Delilah knew she should discourage this growing closeness, should maintain professional boundaries, but she found herself unable to resist. She was falling in love with Austin Palmer, and the realization terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. Emma noticed the change too, watching her father and Delilah with sharp eyes that missed nothing. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after Delilah's arrival, Emma led her to the barn loft where they had shared that first conversation. Once they were settled, Emma pulled a small, leather-bound book from her pocket and offered it to Delilah. It was a journal, the pages filled with Catherine's handwriting. Delilah's hands trembled as she took it, understanding the significance of this offering. "Are you sure you want me to read this?" she asked gently. Emma nodded emphatically, then pointed to a page she had marked with a ribbon. Delilah opened to the marked section and read, "Emma grows more beautiful every day. She has Austin's eyes and my stubbornness, which means she will either change the world or drive us all mad with worry. Today, she climbed the oak tree by the creek and refused to come down for 2 hours because she said the view was too beautiful to leave." Austin was beside himself with fear, but I understood. Sometimes you find a place that speaks to your soul, and leaving feels like tearing away a piece of yourself. That is how I feel about this ranch, about this life we have built. I never knew I could be so happy. Delilah's vision blurred with tears. She looked up to find Emma watching her intently, and the girl reached out to touch the page, then pressed her hand to her heart. The message was clear. This was how Emma felt about her mother's memory, holding it close, unable to let go. "She loved you very much," Delilah said, her voice thick. "And it is all right to keep loving her. Loving someone new does not mean forgetting someone who is gone." Emma's eyes widened, and Delilah realized she had revealed more than she intended, but the girl did not look upset. Instead, she reached out and squeezed Delilah's hand, and there was understanding in her expression that seemed far older than 7 years. That evening, Austin was late for supper, and when he finally arrived, he was covered in mud and clearly exhausted. "One of the cows got stuck in the creek bed," he explained, stripping off his filthy shirt without thinking, revealing a muscled torso marred by old scars. "Took 3 of us to pull her out." Delilah tried not to stare, but it was difficult. Austin caught her looking and froze, seeming to suddenly realize his state of undress. "I apologize. That was inappropriate. You live here," Delilah said, proud that her voice remained steady. "I am the interloper. You are not." He grabbed a clean shirt from a hook by the door, pulling it on. "You are part of this household now." Emma, who had been watching this exchange with barely concealed interest, made a sound that was almost a giggle. Both adults turned to stare at her, and she clapped her hand over her mouth, her eyes dancing with mirth. Austin moved toward his daughter slowly, as if approaching a wild animal that might spook. Emma. The girl looked between her father and Delilah, and then, for the first time in 2 years, she smiled. It was tentative and small, but it was unmistakably a smile. Austin sank into the nearest chair, his legs apparently no longer able to support him. "Emma," he whispered again, and his voice broke on her name. Emma went to him then, crossing the distance she had maintained for so long, and climbed into his lap the way she must have done when she was smaller. Austin's arms came around her, and his shoulders shook with silent sobs. Delilah quietly left the room, giving them privacy for this moment of reconnection. She stood on the porch, wiping her own tears, feeling as though she had just witnessed something sacred. When Austin found her later, after Emma had gone to bed, his eyes were red-rimmed but clearer than she had ever seen them. "She spoke to me," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Just before bed she whispered 'Good night, Papa,' 2 words, but they were everything. Oh, Austin." Delilah reached for his hand without thinking, and he gripped hers like a lifeline. "It was because of you. You gave her permission to heal, to move forward. You showed her it was possible." He pulled her closer, and Delilah found herself standing near enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "How do I thank you for giving me back my daughter?" "You do not need to thank me. I only helped her find what was already there." His free hand came up to cup her cheek, his palm rough and warm against her skin. "Delilah," whatever he was about to say was interrupted by a shout from the direction of the barn. Austin dropped his hand and turned, instantly alert. A rider was approaching at full gallop, and as he drew closer, Delilah recognized Miguel, the ranch foreman. "Boss, we got trouble. Someone cut the fence on the north pasture. At least 24 head have scattered." Austin's expression hardened into something dangerous. "Scatter or get driven?" Hard to say in the dark, but the fence cut looks deliberate. Cattle rustlers. Austin was already moving, grabbing his gun, belt, and hat. He turned to Delilah. "Lock the doors and windows. Keep Emma inside. I will be back when I can. Be careful." He paused, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I will. I have something to come back for now." Then he was gone, mounting his horse and disappearing into the darkness with Miguel. Delilah did as he had instructed, checking all the locks and settling in the kitchen with a rifle Rosa had shown her how to use weeks earlier, just in case. Emma appeared on the stairs in her nightgown, her eyes wide with fear. "Papa," she whispered, and Delilah's heart broke and soared at the sound of that small voice. "He had to check on the cattle. He will be back soon. Come sit with me." Emma padded down the stairs and curled against Delilah's side, and they waited together as the hours stretched long and anxious. Delilah told stories to distract them both, and Emma's voice joined hers occasionally, tentative but growing stronger. It was nearly dawn when the sound of hoofbeats announced Austin's return. Delilah rushed to the door, Emma close behind, relief flooding through her when she saw him dismount, clearly exhausted but unharmed. "We recovered most of the cattle," he said, removing his hat and running his hand through sweat-dampened hair. "Tracks suggest 3, maybe 4 men, but they scattered when they heard us coming. Will they come back? Maybe. I have men posted as lookouts for the next few nights." He looked down at Emma, who had wrapped herself around his leg. "Did you keep Miss Delilah company?" Emma nodded, then, in a voice barely above a whisper, said, "I was scared." Austin scooped her up, despite her age and size, holding her close. "I know, sweetheart, but we are safe now." Delilah watched them, feeling like an outsider to this family moment. But Austin's eyes found hers over Emma's head, and what she saw there made her chest tight with emotion. He was including her, drawing her into this circle of protection and care. The cattle rustling incident marked a turning point. Austin began teaching Delilah to shoot properly, insisting she needed to be able to defend herself and Emma if trouble came. The lessons brought them into close physical proximity, with Austin standing behind her to adjust her stance, his hands guiding hers on the rifle, his breath warm against her ear as he gave instructions. The air between them grew charged with an attraction neither could deny anymore. More than once, Delilah caught Austin watching her with an expression that made her pulse race. She knew she should discourage him, should remember her position in his household, but she was tired of denying what she felt. Emma became a co-conspirator of sorts, engineering situations that left Delilah and Austin alone together. The girl's voice grew stronger each day, though she remained quiet by nature, speaking in careful sentences as if each word was precious. She talked about her mother openly now, sharing memories with Delilah and Austin, and the house that had been so silent with grief began to fill with the sound of healing. 2 months after Delilah's arrival, an autumn storm blew in with unusual ferocity, bringing lightning that split the sky and rain that turned the ground to mud. Austin and his men worked frantically to secure the animals and buildings, while Delilah and Emma watched from the safety of the house. A bolt of lightning struck one of the outbuildings and flames erupted despite the rain. Austin and Miguel ran toward it, and Delilah's heart climbed into her throat as she watched him disappear into the smoke. "Papa!" Emma cried, pressing against the window. The men emerged dragging equipment they had managed to save, but the building was a loss, the fire too intense to fight. They let it burn, containing it enough to prevent spread to other structures. When Austin finally stumbled back to the house, he was covered in soot and ash, coughing from smoke inhalation. Delilah had hot water ready, and she bullied him into washing up and letting her check him for injuries. "You could have been killed," she said, her hands trembling as she cleaned a burn on his forearm. "It was just tools in there, nothing worth dying for." His voice was hoarse from the smoke. "Exactly. So why risk yourself? Because those tools feed us, keep the ranch running. I cannot afford to replace them easily." He caught her hand, stilling her frantic movements. "Delilah, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, and the intensity of his gaze nearly undid her. "I am all right," he said softly. "I am here, this time, but what about next time?" What if her voice broke, and she realized with stark clarity that the thought of losing him was unbearable? Austin stood, pulling her up with him, his hands framing her face. "I cannot promise there will not be a next time. This life is hard and sometimes dangerous. But I can promise that I will always fight to come back. To you, to Emma, to this life we are building." "Austin," she breathed, and then his mouth was on hers, kissing her with a desperation that spoke of long-denied desire and newfound hope. Delilah kissed him back, her arms winding around his neck, not caring that he was dirty and smoke-stained. His hands slid to her waist, pulling her closer, and she felt the solid strength of him, the heat of his body, the racing of his heart that matched her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Austin rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that for weeks." "I have been wanting you to," she admitted. "Emma is going to be insufferably smug about this. She has been trying to push us together for a month." Delilah laughed, the sound bright and free. "She is wise beyond her years, like her mother." But this time, saying those words did not bring pain. Instead, Austin smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look young and happy. "Catherine would have liked you, would have approved of this." "I hope so." He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise rather than a claiming. When they heard Emma's footsteps on the stairs, they stepped apart, but their hands remained linked. Emma appeared and took in the scene with one glance. Her face split into a grin and she said, clearly and deliberately, "Finally." Both adults laughed, and Emma joined them, and the house that had been so full of sorrow rang with joy. The following weeks were a revelation. Austin courted Delilah properly, stealing moments when Emma was occupied, bringing her wildflowers from the meadow, teaching her to ride well enough to accompany him on his rounds of the ranch. They talked endlessly, discovering shared values and complementary differences, building a foundation of friendship beneath the growing physical attraction. Austin was different now, lighter somehow, as if letting himself love again had lifted a weight from his shoulders. He laughed more, smiled easily, and the ranch seemed to reflect his improved spirits. The men worked with renewed energy, and even the animals seemed more content. Emma flourished under the change. Her voice grew stronger, her confidence blooming. She still had moments of sadness, times when she missed her mother with an intensity that brought tears. But she had learned that grief and joy could coexist, that loving Delilah did not mean betraying Catherine's memory. Rosa, who had watched these developments with satisfaction, cornered Delilah one day while they were preserving vegetables. "When is he going to make an honest proposal?" she demanded. "Everyone can see how you two look at each other." Delilah blushed. "We have only been courting for a few weeks." "You have been courting since you arrived, you just did not call it that." Rosa shook her head. "That man loves you and you love him. Emma needs a mother and you need a family. What is there to wait for? Propriety, social convention, making sure this is real and not just what? Convenience, loneliness." Rosa's eyes softened. "Mija, I see the way you look at each other. That is not convenience. That is love, real and true. Do not waste time being cautious. Life is too short and too precious." Her words echoed in Delilah's mind that evening as she sat on the porch with Austin, Emma playing nearby with her ever-present cat. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Delilah thought about how much her life had changed in just 4 months. "What are you thinking about?" Austin asked, his hand finding hers in the growing darkness. "How I came here expecting to teach Emma her letters, and instead I found a home." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Is that what this place is to you? Home?" "Yes." "You and Emma, this ranch, even the endless sky and the hard work, it all feels right in a way nothing else ever has." Austin was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, pulling her up with him. "Emma, come here, sweetheart." The girl came running, curiosity bright in her eyes. Austin knelt down so he was at her level. "Emma, I need to ask you something important. How would you feel if Miss Delilah became part of our family permanently? If she married me and became your new mama?" Emma's eyes went wide and she looked between her father and Delilah. "Really?" "If she says yes, and if you want her to." Emma launched herself at Delilah, wrapping her arms around her waist. "Yes, please say yes." Delilah looked down at the girl clinging to her, then at Austin, who was watching her with his heart in his eyes, and she felt a certainty settle over her like a warm blanket. "I have not heard a proper proposal yet," she said, trying to keep her voice light despite the tears threatening to fall. Austin stood, took her hand, and in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and deeply romantic, he knelt before her. "Delilah Harper, you came into our lives like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. You gave me back my daughter, taught me how to love again, and showed me that grief does not have to be the end of happiness. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and Emma's mother and my partner in this life we are building?" "Yes," Delilah said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, I will marry you." Austin surged to his feet and kissed her, lifting her off the ground and spinning her around while Emma cheered, and the sun set in glory around them. They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony in Independence. Delilah wore a new dress that Rosa had helped her sew, cream-colored with lace at the collar and cuffs. Emma stood beside her in a matching dress, proudly holding a bouquet of late-season wildflowers. Austin wore his best suit and looked so handsome that Delilah could barely breathe when she saw him waiting for her at the front of the small church. His eyes never left hers as she walked down the aisle, and when they spoke their vows, his voice was steady and sure. The entire town turned out, it seemed, filling the church and spilling out onto the street. Even Marion Foster attended, though she left immediately after the ceremony, her face pinched with jealousy. The celebration afterward at the ranch was joyful and loud, with music and dancing and more food than Delilah had ever seen. Miguel and the ranch hands had strung lanterns between the barn and the house, creating a magical space as darkness fell. Austin pulled her into his arms for the first dance, and Delilah felt like she was floating. "Happy," he murmured against her ear, "beyond measure. Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." Emma danced with them, her laughter ringing out, and Delilah thought about how far they had all come. A man learning to love again, a child finding her voice, a woman discovering that home was not a place but the people you chose to share your life with. The winter that followed was harsh, with snow that piled high and temperatures that dipped below freezing for weeks on end. But the house was warm, filled with the love they had built together. Delilah officially adopted Emma, giving the girl her last name as well as Austin's, cementing their family bond legally and emotionally. Emma excelled in her studies, her natural intelligence flowering under Delilah's patient teaching. By spring, she was reading at a level far beyond her years and had started keeping a journal of her own, following in her mother Catherine's footsteps. Austin and Delilah's marriage deepened through the quiet winter months. They learned each other's rhythms, the small habits and preferences that make up a shared life. Austin taught Delilah about ranching, and she surprised him with how quickly she took to the work. Delilah taught Austin about literature and music, reading aloud in the evenings while he worked on leather repairs or accounts. They talked about Catherine openly, including her memory in their family rather than trying to erase it. Emma needed to know her birth mother would never be forgotten, and Austin needed to honor the woman who had shaped so much of his life. Delilah understood this, secure enough in Austin's love not to feel threatened by the ghost of his first wife. In late spring, Delilah realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with joy and terror, in equal measure. She told Austin one evening after Emma had gone to bed, and his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. Shock giving way to delight, his hands immediately going to her still flat stomach as if he could feel the life growing there. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a gentleness that made her heart ache. "Thank you for this, for Emma, for choosing this life with me. Thank you for teaching me what love really looks like." Emma was thrilled when they told her she would be a big sister. She immediately began planning and preparing, helping Delilah sew tiny clothes and clearing space in the house for a cradle. She talked to Delilah's growing belly, telling the baby stories about the ranch and promising to teach her or him everything she knew. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months. Delilah worked as long as she was able, only stopping when Austin insisted she needed rest. Rosa became a constant presence, helping with the heavier household work and clucking over Delilah like a mother hen. As autumn painted the prairie in gold and crimson, Delilah's time drew near. She was frightened, remembering how Catherine had died of fever, but Austin stayed close, holding her hand and reminding her that she was strong, on a clear October morning, with Rosa and the doctor from Independence in attendance, Delilah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Austin held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he counted tiny fingers and toes. "What should we name him?" he asked, looking between Delilah and Emma, who had been allowed in once the baby was cleaned and swaddled. Emma spoke up immediately. "What about Jacob?" "That was Grandpa's name," she said, referring to Austin's father. "Jacob Palmer," Delilah said, testing the name. "I like it." Austin bent to kiss first the baby, then Emma, then Delilah. "Jacob Palmer it is. Our family is complete." But Emma had other ideas. "Not complete yet. Jacob needs a little sister." The adults laughed, and Delilah said, "Let us get through this one first." The years that followed were full and rich, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and family. Jacob grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's eyes and his mother's thoughtful nature. Emma became his fierce protector and patient teacher, reading to him and showing him the wonders of the prairie she loved. 2 years after Jacob's birth, Delilah gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine, honoring Austin's first wife. Emma wept happy tears when they told her, understanding the significance of the gesture. Little Catherine, with her dark curls and sunny disposition, brought a new lightness to the family. Austin thrived as a father and husband, the grief that had once defined him now just one thread in the tapestry of his life. He expanded the ranch, built a new barn, and began breeding horses in addition to cattle. The ranch prospered under his management and Delilah's organizational skills. Emma grew into a beautiful, intelligent young woman, her early trauma shaping her into someone with deep empathy and strength. She became a teacher herself, opening a small school in Independence and dedicating herself to helping children who struggled to find their voices. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Austin and Delilah stood on the porch where they had shared so many conversations, watching their children play in the yard. Jacob was chasing Catherine, both of them shrieking with laughter, while Emma sat under a tree reading a book. "You ever regret it?" Austin asked, pulling Delilah against his side. "Giving up your independence to tie yourself to a stubborn cowboy and his complicated family?" Delilah looked up at him, at the face she loved more with each passing year, and smiled. "Not for a single moment. You and the children are the best things that ever happened to me. You saved us, you know, Emma and me both. We were drowning in grief and you threw us a lifeline." "No," Delilah said softly, "we saved each other. You taught me what real love looks like, messy and imperfect and absolutely worth fighting for. You gave me a family, a purpose, a home. We healed together." Austin kissed her, slow and sweet, and Delilah felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt that first time, multiplied by years of partnership and shared experiences. "Mama, Papa," Catherine called, running toward them with something clutched in her small hands. "Look what I found." It was a bird's nest, carefully woven and perfect in its simplicity. Catherine held it out with pride, and Delilah admired it properly while Austin lifted his daughter onto his shoulders so she could see the world from his height. Jacob joined them, demanding equal treatment, and soon Austin had a child on each shoulder while Delilah laughed at the sight. Emma looked up from her book and smiled, and Delilah thought about the scared, silent 7-year-old she had met 5 years ago. So much had changed. So much had healed. As the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the Palmer family stood together, complete and whole, bound by love that had grown from grief and hope. Austin had hired Delilah to teach his daughter, to bring civilization and education to a ranch in the middle of Missouri. But what she had really taught them all was how to live again, how to love again, how to build a future without forgetting the past. And in return, Austin had taught Delilah that home was not something you were born into, but something you built with your own hands, alongside people you chose to love. He had shown her that second chances were real, that hearts broken by loss could mend and love again, stronger for having survived the breaking. In the house that night, after the children were asleep, Austin and Delilah lay together in the bed they shared, talking quietly about their plans for the future. The ranch was doing well, the children were healthy and happy, and their love had deepened into something steady and unshakable. "I love you," Austin said, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "I do not say it enough, but I love you more than I can express." "I love you too," Delilah replied, squeezing his hand. "Thank you for taking a chance on a governess from Denver who knew nothing about ranch life. Thank you for seeing past a grief-stricken widower to the man I could become again." They fell asleep like that, hands linked, hearts intertwined, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The years continued to roll past, each one bringing new joys and challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick animals and broken equipment, all the difficulties of ranch life. But there were also birthday celebrations and holidays, first steps and first words, school plays and church socials, all the small moments that make up a life well lived. Emma eventually married a young lawyer from Independence, a gentle man who loved her intelligence and strength. They had 3 children of their own, and Emma brought them to the ranch often, wanting them to know the place that had shaped her. Jacob grew into a tall, strong young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. He took over more of the daily operations as Austin aged, learning everything his father could teach him about running a successful ranch and treating people with fairness and respect. Catherine developed a passion for horses, spending hours in the barn and corrals, training even the most difficult animals with patience and skill. She had her adopted sister's empathy and her mother's determination, a combination that served her well. Austin and Delilah aged together, their hair turning gray, their faces marking the passage of time. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, seasoned by years of partnership and shared experience. They were sitting on that same porch 30 years after Delilah first arrived, watching their grandchildren play in the yard, when Austin turned to her and said, "I cannot imagine my life without you. Cannot even remember what it was like before you arrived on that dusty street in Independence." "It was sadder," Delilah said simply, "for both of us, but we found each other and we built something beautiful." "We did we not?" Austin smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "A family, a legacy, a love that will outlast us both." Their children and grandchildren gathered around them, multiple generations connected by the bonds of love and family. Emma stood with her husband and children, Jacob with his wife and 2 sons, Catherine with the young veterinarian she had recently married. As the sun set one more time over the endless prairie, Delilah looked around at the family they had created and felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had come to this ranch as a hired teacher, broken-hearted and uncertain about her future. She had found healing, purpose, and a love deeper than she had ever imagined possible. Austin had learned that grief did not have to be the end of his story, that opening his heart again was not a betrayal but a continuation of the love Catherine had taught him. Emma had found her voice and her strength, becoming a woman her mothers, both Catherine and Delilah, would be proud of. And together, they had created something lasting and true. The ranch would continue after they were gone, passed down through generations, each adding their own stories to its history. But it all started here, with a cowboy who hired a woman to teach his daughter and ended up learning the most important lesson of all. That love, real love, has the power to heal even the deepest wounds and create beauty from the ashes of loss. As darkness fell and the family moved inside for supper, Austin pulled Delilah close one more time. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." "Thank you," she replied, "for teaching me how to love again, too." And in that moment, surrounded by the family they had built and the life they had created together, they were home,